Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pets, People, Life, and Longevity. I am Jan Jeremias, and I am so happy to welcome you, and I'm glad that you are here. Just a little bit about me. I am a health coach that specializes in overall health, and that is for people and pets. So that could be movement, essential oils, Reiki. For people, it's meditation and breathing, even though that does help our pets indirectly, let me tell you. And I am the co-author of the top-selling essential oil book for animals called Spoil Your Pet, A Practical Guide to Using Essential Oils in Dogs and Cats. And today I'm really excited to welcome Crystal Soucy to our show. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you, Jan. I'm honored to be here with you today.
So let me tell you a little bit about Crystal, and hopefully some of what she does and her story you will totally resonate with. Crystal helps pet parents with the grief that comes with healthcare challenges and facing things like end-of-life decisions and the loss of pets and even more. Emotional support is often not easily accessible, or the whole idea of pet loss, I don't think, is very accepted in the more in the general world. But to pet parents, this can feel really like a huge loss, which often goes unnoticed and unprocessed. And so after getting a holistic life coaching certification in 2019, Crystal decided to turn the immense pain that she felt after the loss of her dog Bachi into her purpose by becoming a certified pet loss grief coach. She recently enrolled in another grief care professional certification program and is looking forward to expanding her knowledge and ability to help others on their grief journey. And she does this work in honor of her beloved Bachi, who she lost. And I'm so excited to welcome her to the show for her to share her story and maybe some tips and help to people who are, in their grief journey somewhere, or maybe thinking about losing a pet.
Yes, actually, we're going to maybe go in a little bit of a different order than I thought we would, Jan, if you don't mind, because there's something that I want to speak to right out of the gate.
Okay.
I know in the introduction I provided you with that I said that I do this work in Bachi's honor, and I say that on my website too, and have said that in social media posts and things like that. And I've realized I rescued another dog back in March, Mr. Marley. And I realized that I really should be giving him some credit too, a good amount of it actually, because he has really had a big impact on my grief and healing journey. And to be truthful, I don't know that I would have made it to a place where I even felt inspired to pursue becoming a pet loss grief coach had he not come into my life. I think I would probably still be in more of a darker place and kind of stuck and in a lot of ways. And he's really helped me a lot and has a large role in what I've decided to do. So I have to correct myself when I do things like this moving forward, and maybe even change the wording on my website, because Marley deserves a lot of the credit too. So
I think something that you shared really touched me is that I think it's amazing how pets can help us move through challenging situations. And here you're talking about a situation where you had the loss, and that can be any loss that they feel. I think pets give us a purpose sometimes to go on. And that's what I'm hearing right now from you as I listen to you, is that, Marley gave you this purpose, which maybe it was very hard for you to find without him at that point.
Yes, very much so. I mean, Bachi was my world for 16 years. And taking care of him. I revolved my life around him. And in the last couple of years, especially, he became what I called pretty high maintenance. He was on a lot of medications and needed some sort of pill or liquid morning, noon, and night. And, I'm grateful that I had things that helped keep him healthy and happy for, a longer than maybe he would have. But it was a lot, his care. And I mean, I did it lovingly and happily, of course, but to have that suddenly stop was, even though, I had what I guess you could call a planned goodbye, it was still very, very, very hard. And one day you're, doing all of these things and you have this routine, and all day long you're thinking about their care and the schedule that you have of medications, outside time, those types of things. And then it just suddenly stops. And it's not something you can really prepare for, even when you know it's coming, I think.
I so heartfully agree. I don't think it's anything you can prepare for. And I think that along with the feeling of like this, all of a sudden your whole world and whole schedule changes because they're not there and you don't have, there's also this kind of element of relief where you don't have it anymore, which I know I felt extremely guilty. It was kind of
Yes.
like this feeling of like, well, how can I think that, kind of thing, or how could I feel that? But when you take care of, whether that be an animal or a person, whatever it is, and they require so much care, it is exhausting a lot of the time. And
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
is there is that sense of relief.
Yes, I did experience that, along with the guilt that goes hand in hand with that. There were a lot of times where it wasn't so easy to get all of those medications in Bocce. He either didn't have an appetite or wasn't having it, and I was trying all these different ways, off to the store again and again to try this thing and that thing to hide pills in, and it was hard, and I hated that I got frustrated with him at times. But you can't say a dog, you need this to live, and so it did get very intense and very stressful. And yeah, so having Marley in my life now, like you said, definitely has given me a new sense of purpose. I'm not married, I don't have kids, so I kind of look at being a dog mom as a big part of my identity. And I didn't realize until I actually brought him home, although it's been quite challenging because he's a rescue and he came with some baggage, as they call it. That's a whole nother story and a whole nother podcast episode. But I really love taking care of him. And it's funny, ironically, I feel like he's taking care of me in a lot of ways. So, and it's been really a joy it's been just a little over 5 months to see the transformation that has taken place with him from when I first brought him home to now. So,
You bring up an interesting point, though, when you talk about it, that I know that having spoken to a number of people who've lost a pet through the years, there's always that, like, what is the right time to get a pet afterwards? And I know for everyone it's different. For me, I
yes.
remember immediately after Casey died, I wasn't ready for a new pet. I mean, I'm talking about within the first few months. Part of me wanted it, but part of me, in a way, was happy not to have that responsibility. Like, she required quite a lot of care. Sounds like Bocce did at the end. And so it was kind of like, I just need a break, a breather for a few months. And then I did this thing. Actually, there was a local pet store, and even though I would never get a pet from a pet store, they had puppies out, and I used to go and play with the puppies to get like my dog fix. It was
Yeah.
kind of like, I'll just borrow a dog for a few
Right.
hours and be able to return them. And then I went, and not too long after that, I started to look, not to know that if I was going to do a rescue, that might not happen immediately, but the whole idea of when is the right time.
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, I kind of include something along those lines in the page of my website where I summarize the services that I offer, because there's so much, you know, during and then after, and then like all of these different stages where a pet parent could use some support or a sounding board or help with decision making and sorting things out in their mind about the feelings that they're feeling and the decisions that they're trying to make, from the anticipatory stage to then it's happened, and then some time goes by, and you almost, some people grapple with, I almost feel a little bit happy. I enjoyed this or I enjoyed that. And you feel guilty for that because for so long you felt like I can't possibly ever be happy again or experience joy again because I lost my beloved pet, the love of my life, my fur baby. There's so many terms we use, right? So I've actually included that as one of the things that I can talk someone through is planning for another pet. And that was me too, where Marley came along when I was not quite ready yet. I was starting to think that maybe later this year I would start to look and da da da. And again, the Marley story is a long one, so I won't go down that rabbit hole too much. But because I felt like I was getting signs and signals that were coming from Bocce in a way, that I had his blessing, that he was almost saying, this is it, mommy. You got to go get Marley. That made me feel like, well, I had a different timeline in mind, but the universe has spoken, so to speak. And I just felt like Bocce had a paw in that, as they say. And off I went to go get him. So yeah. Yeah.
Love that expression, a paw in that. Yes, that's just a great expression.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll back up a little bit and we'll just talk about a time that comes, and that's the time of, toward the end, or maybe, oh yes, you can have the accidents that happen where you have no plan, and that has, I'm sure, a whole other kind of ramifications around pet loss,
Right.
as it does with people, because there's no chance to say goodbye, like all those kinds of things. And then you have the point at which you're dealing maybe with an ill pet, or maybe just an older pet, where you're sitting there and saying, okay, well, the time's getting close, and how do I make that decision? Which I have been there, and it's probably one of the hardest decisions we have to make. And so maybe you can
Absolutely.
speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can only mainly speak about my own experience, but yes, the anticipatory grief was brutal for me. I feel like I was in that phase for several months, actually. And when it really started to feel and seem like we're close, I had made the decision to make an appointment to have a vet come into my home, to say goodbye to Bocce. But even that day of, I still was doing the should I, shouldn't I, um, thing in my mind. And even when the vet called me and said I was going to get ready to head your way, I told her I still don't know if I'm going to do this. Thankfully, she was wonderful about it and said, that's fine. I'm happy to come there and assess him and we can talk. And if ultimately you decide it's not time, then I'll leave. No harm done, no problem at all. So I just, for me, your pet so well, right? Every little trait and personality quirk, and I just knew and saw that Bocce had sort of already, he was fighting. Because he was a fighter, and who knows how much longer he would have fought and held on, but it was clear that he just was not himself anymore. And that zest for life, that playfulness, that joy and happiness that everyone knew Bocce to be. He loved everyone and everything, was kind of already I don't want to say gone, but I guess that is the right word. So it comes down to, sort of making that decision. Am I doing it? Am I holding on for me, for them? Like, sort of weighing those decisions. And as heart-wrenching as it was, and as it is for anyone that has to go through this, their quality of life has to come first. So it's brutal. There's no way around it being that.
Yeah. One of the things I know that for me, I remember different pets. It's just they have this look in their eyes, which is just
Yes.
like you look at them and you just know it's like they bore into your soul, and it's kind of like, Mom, I've had enough, or I don't like, I've had enough, or this isn't the way I want to live, kind of
Exactly.
feeling. And I remember seeing or having it with every pet I've had, was just this feeling of they finally, like they would look at me saying, okay, like, I love you,
Yes.
but I'm tired,
Right.
kind of
That's,
feeling.
like I said, you get to know them so well, and they entertain us every day. And it's like, even though they can't speak with words, they do communicate with us. Absolutely. And we communicate all day long with our pets, and like you're saying, you can just tell. And even when you don't want to face it and make the decision, there just comes that point where you have to. And this is where I feel like I come into play now, hopefully with people moving forward. Is I do have a wonderful vet, so she was helpful in a lot of ways, but I didn't even know that there was such a thing as support around pets, whether it's the anticipatory stage or right after the loss, and beyond, in all these other different ways. So as the 1 year anniversary of Bocce's passing approached, is really when this idea came to me. Before that, it never even crossed my mind to become a pet loss grief coach. But through my own journey, his passing actually made me much more sort of fascinated and interested in the topic of grief just as a whole, and the ways that
Right.
it plays an active part of our lives every day in a whole bunch of different ways, not just around death. And I found myself reading about it more, listening to podcasts. I was participating in support groups through Lap of Love, who is the service that I use for the in-home euthanasia. And really, just sort of that 1 year anniversary started to roll around, and I became, as you mentioned in my introduction, a certified life coach in 2019, and launched my business in early 2020, right 2 weeks before COVID hit. And so, I did some things with that, but it never really got the momentum that I hoped. So this sort of struck me as a way to breathe new life, no pun intended, into my coaching business, and sort of pivot and niche it down to specifically pet loss and grief support. So, and it's
Well,
funny how it's gotten me very excited. The idea of helping other people. So yeah, the whole turning pain into purpose is very meaningful to me. So
absolutely. I think for a lot of us, that's what's the impetus and makes us very passionate about what we do.
yeah.
Um, one of the aspects that really I think is beautiful about having a pet, and you mentioned that, just your whole, I don't want to say fascination, because I think that sounds kind of funny, but
Mm,
fascination with grief, and the fact that we're going through this, in many aspects of our life. We have
right.
loss, and I think that it's always been, to me, one of the gifts of having a pet, because I think that we go through that loss and we just realize the preciousness of life and that frailty of life
Yes.
firsthand. So because for some people, they don't really lose a significant person in their life, maybe till they're very, much older.
Right.
And I think that that's really one of the gifts that pets offer us, is
Yes. One of many, right?
one of many, and it's just this idea of the whole experience of what it is to have somebody else in your life, and what a blessing that is.
Yes.
And to know that, and to really, have gratitude for it.
Right.
I find that one of the places I am now, which is, I try not to let it influence, but my last dog lived to 19, and Bachi lived to 16. So, but Tonka's like close to 12. And he just looked up. Hi, buddy. Is as he's part black lab, so he's getting very gray in the jowls, like as
Right.
am I getting gray, but he's getting gray.
Yeah.
He's getting gray, and it's like a little tug at my heart as I watch him, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's getting gray. And he acts really spry, but knowing in my mind, like, that he's not going to live forever, and
Right.
not being able to envision my life without him. Like, we are so bonded, which I think happened to many people during COVID also.
Right.
Is this whole
Right.
idea of we became very attached to our pets because we were
Yeah.
deprived of human contact.
Yeah, very true. Very true. And yeah, what you speak to now is, that with me getting Marley, even, it's like, oh, well, now I've just walked right into the fact that I am again one day going to go through the same grief process. Well, I shouldn't say the same, but I will go through it again. I've set myself up for it by bringing Marley home, and of course I thought of that, and I've decided that the love is worth it. So, like you said, they get older and their birthdays come, and you're like, oh, 10, oh, 11, and you notice the changes. But as much as we can focus on the here and now and the present, and the gifts that they give us is really important. And yeah, it's amazing what they bring to our lives, for sure.
And I think and I love what you said, because I do think that everybody who is a pet person and then decides to get another pet, for them, they make that decision of having them for as much as we have them, and getting that love is worth the suffering that we're going to have to go through when they're not there.
Right.
And I think that sometimes people, and there's never, it's so individual as far as every person is different. And so I think that there are people who decide, like I have friends who said, I'm never getting another pet. Like I could never go through this again.
Right. Yep. And that's fine, and I'll never not grieve Bocce. I'll grieve Bocce until I take my own last breath. And I've accepted that, and I'm okay with that. I actually feel like I wear my grief as a badge of honor. I feel like by continuing to grieve him and remember him and pay tribute to him in the various ways that I do, that's how I stay connected to him. That's how I continue my relationship with him. So yeah. I feel like I'm someone who will never say, oh, it gets easier. Oh, it gets easier. Grief does change over time. So, and I still, after over a year, have days where I can sob on a dime. And, I probably, on most days, I do cry a little bit when all I have to do is pull up my Facebook memories, and there he is in video and pictures, and all of the fun and the adventures that we had together, and just the little love and puffball that he was. So and I'm okay with that. I just feel like I have, from this experience, learned to live with my grief and move forward with my grief. Whereas in the early days, I probably did go through that when is this going to end? When is this going to stop? I can't take this anymore. And there was a very dark period, where I just didn't even know if I wanted to continue living without bocce, because again, my sense of purpose was gone.
And to what you're speaking, I love this, and I think part of it is our sense of identity is gone. Like you said,
Mhm.
you were a pet mom, like, and I think that if you like, no matter what you are, if you have
Right.
something that ends and that's how you identify yourself, then all of a sudden your identity is gone, and you go through this whole thing of like, who am I without that? Like, if I'm
Right.
not a pet mom, then who am I really? And
Right.
so I think that when we get so connected to something and they become intertwined in our being like that, there is this whole feeling of like almost like an identity crisis that happens.
Yep. Yes, exactly. So yeah, so that's why I want to be there for anyone that needs help walking through their grief journey, because I probably should have reached out for help when I was in my darkest days and really didn't. I made it through to the other side to a better place. Like I said, my grief will never end or stop, but I have sort of come to a place where I I don't want to use the word embrace, but like I said, I've learned to live with it and accept that it's just part of my life now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do I mean, you were very lucky to have a vet that um honored that for you, that was understanding and
Yes.
probably compassionate toward what you were going through. I've also been quite lucky. I mean, when Casey died, I remember the vet cried. I mean, she was 19 years old and he had been her vet for 19 years because
Yeah.
I had her that basically the entire time. And I remember how upset he was. So I think that, for those of us who are lucky to have those relationships, but I do think that sometimes, and I'm not being critical of vets because I think it's a very hard thing to be around all the time. You're around
Oh,
a lot of death and a lot of
yes.
people who lose pets. And I have a
Yes.
number of friends who are veterinarians who do have somewhat of an aloof kind of distant approach because psychologically they can't handle it.
Right.
So I feel that's when someone like your services, or I've actually helped people through the grief loss process with pets and people through the years, that it's so important to find someone though.
Yeah, I agree. And um, I think that one of the things that makes me a little unique, hopefully, in this space is that because my life coaching certification came first, that if someone decides to work with me, and obviously the focus would normally probably be on their grief around their pet. Let's face it, grief impacts all areas of our lives. So as a life coach, we could always widen the lens on things and look at other areas of someone's life and um, work through other things, because it's all connected. And a lot of times, grief impacts all of our relationships, our work relationships, our family relationships, our friendships. And sometimes through our grief, we end up with new relationships forming because get into a group where you form a friendship or that sort of thing. And I don't know what your experience is. I'm curious if you've experienced something similar. Sometimes through our grief, relationships that we've had for a long time kind of start to fizzle out or fall by the wayside altogether because what we've been through, things just don't, sort of jive or line up anymore with that relationship because of our grief, or, vice versa. Someone else um, may have distanced themselves or feel like, they're going in a different direction. And so, yeah, I think that that's one of the things that maybe makes me unique is the life coaching certification that came first, and my experience with that, and all of the different facets of our life that come into play, and how the grief that we're experiencing affects all of those areas.
No, I agree that grief does affect every aspect of our life. I know, through human grief and through pet grief, especially because recently it was for me for human grief over the loss of my dad. My
Right.
impetus to work was just not there. I mean, there was just there were certain things that I loved to do weren't that hard because that was kind of like my it was part of what I loved, and it was easy for me, and it was comfortable, and it made me feel good and like filled a part of my soul that I needed. And there were other aspects of what I do that I just was like, I can't do this right now. I just can't do
Yeah.
it. And I think the biggest thing, for me through that process, which I think some of my work through the years kind of all of a sudden became very obvious to me, was that is this element of being compassionate for yourself, of just
Yeah.
if you need to cry, if you need to, get angry, if you need to, go into the, for me, if you need to go into the shower and scream, then go into the shower and scream, or go out somewhere. But there was this ability of let yourself feel whatever you're feeling.
Yes. Yes. I think that's huge. And a lot of people suffer in silence and, just try to kind of continue as if they're okay when they're not. And I think our society as a whole is not great about grief. I mean, just look at any employee handbook
Right, I
to
know.
tell you,
Exactly.
your parent, your spouse, your child dies, you get 3 days off. And then it's supposed to be back to work and back to normal. Oh, it's
I
it's quite
agree.
crazy. And then when it comes to pets, it's not acknowledged really at all.
At all. And
Right.
I think that, like I said, with people, I mean, I think in COVID, one of the blessings is people did work from home. So I think
Right.
people all of a sudden one spent a lot of time around their pets, but also I don't know how many meetings and classes I've been on over the past like 3 or 4 years where pets are present, like us talking now, and we're both at
Right.
home.
Yep.
And Tonka's hanging out on the sofa over there, and Marley's somewhere close by,
Yep.
so I think that they become and so people have a picture of that in our lives. But I still think that there is this huge disconnect, especially in our in our culture, where work becomes such a huge focus of our lives. And and employers are not very compassionate and understanding about those types of things, especially revolved around a pet.
Right.
I always found that, I know in my experience that it was very much like people who were not pet people, like who had never didn't understand it at all. Like they were totally clueless. They did not understand that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, ugh, this is one of the things that still bothers me a lot to this day, is that I feel like part of my decision making the day I said goodbye to Bocce, my job did come in, was a big factor in that. And I went back to work the very next day and did not give myself any time to process what had just happened. It's very traumatic, even when it is something that is quote unquote planned and you've decided to do. It's very traumatic. And that particular job that I was at a little over a year ago, I'm not even in it anymore. So I look back at that and I'm just like, I really, that's one of the things that I wish I had done a little differently. So yeah.
Yeah. I've had, I think we all have different situations like that, where we have circumstances that happened where we were like, whether it be a job or something where we feel that responsibility, and, we wondered whether that has kind of colored our decision making.
Yeah.
And I've had different situations like that in my life. And I think, I assume we all have. And I just remember afterwards saying, yeah, but it did get me to the point where I am now. So it did get you here to what you're doing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so just have to look at it as as a part of the impetus, or the part of the thing that kind of was the
Right.
trigger or the circumstance that kind of got you to what you're doing now.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that we have a tendency, I think this is just normal, is we sometimes fixate and just ruminate over that final day, those final hours, and replaying it and regretting. And we have to stop ourselves and remember the life we gave them and the years. Thankfully, in my case, it was 16. You had 19 with your previous baby. And I know not everybody is lucky enough to have that amount of time. So I want to, be sensitive to that. But I think the brain does a lot of crazy things, and it's easy to get stuck and hung up in that place of rumination over final moments or hours or days, when there really is this whole life that you had together that you can look back on, reflect on, and really find peace around and appreciate.
It's a really good point, because I do think that we get fixated. And I remember, it's not only the mental fixation. I'm a visual person, and it was like the images, and that was like,
Right.
it was almost like a video or, TV show that was playing in my head of those last scenes
Right.
that happened, whether that be, and you're like,
Mm.
you're not only replaying the conversations or just your feelings, you're replaying the images of what you
Right.
saw over those last few moments.
Right.
I'm
Right.
literally having to, and sometimes that's the gift, as much as it tugs at our hearts, that's the gift of all the, well, I know you have, because you talked about all the photos and videos we have, because it began to the point where I was like, almost like, that's what I want to remember. So I would look at those pictures or replay those
Yeah.
videos, or, have those trigger that visual part of my memory versus those last, those last hours.
Right.
Which
Right.
were traumatic, basically, so.
Yeah. And there are so many ways we can shift our grief. Again, it doesn't go away. So if we can shift it and try to move into more gratitude and positive headspaces, there's so many different ways where we can honor them. I mean, if you were to walk into my home, it's a bocce museum. You cannot look in any direction and not see his pictures all over the place. I've got a little memorial table where his ashes and his paw print and his clipping of fur sits. Outside, I've got an entire bocce flower garden with a stone that a friend gave me that has one of the sayings on it. And even just taking care of that before Marley came into the picture just felt like, every day I have to water it. I have to check on it, just seeing how it changed and how things were growing and new life was coming up, and it was representative bocce, made me happy and brought me joy. So, I mean, that's a whole nother topic too, but there are really so many ways we can remember them, memorialize them, and keep them close to us.
Absolutely. One of the things I did actually for this podcast, because when I first started recording, and one of the comments of Eric, who is kind enough to do the show with me, or do the back of, the back end of the show, said to me, I talk about Tonka, but we don't hear him. So I recorded him. And my last dog was a talker. So I have a huge, she used to talk, not bark. She would talk like, roar, 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 roar. I mean, it was hysterical. And she had whole conversations. And, but Tonka barks and doesn't really talk much, but he barks. And I recorded his barking. And I'm so happy that I have those recordings, because it's his voice, as opposed to pictures and things like that. That's his voice to me. And, if you have a pet that's a talker, those are the things you miss when they're not there, because that's a part of them being in your life. My last cat was a talker, constantly. People would comment when they would call me and say, do you have a baby? Because he would yowl in the background. But, it's part of their love for you and them being in
Right.
your environment and your home, which is just such joy. And so one of the things I just would like to shift and maybe talk a little bit, and I touched upon this, but and I mentioned it, but I'd like to explore it a little more. And that's, everybody's experience of grief is going to be different.
Right. 100%. Yeah. Everyone's grief journey is very unique. So I think one of the most important things as a pet loss grief counselor, right? Maybe any grief counselor or coach, is to honor someone else's story, to give them the space to feel like they're able to honor and be heard. Because I think there's so many, again, this sort of suffering in silence concept where people we're trying to still go through our daily lives and uphold our jobs and all of our other responsibilities. And sometimes you just want to have a space where you can talk about them and the things they did or the experiences that you had. And, there's that concern of, someone thinking, how can they still be grieving their pet? Why aren't they over it yet? Or just get another, you can always get another dog, you can always get another cat. And it just, so we hold back and we suffer in silence a lot of times because we don't feel like we have that space. So I think that's one of the biggest things about this type of service that I provide, and that others that are in this space do as well, is just creating that safe environment, that safe space where you feel like you can be heard, where you can grieve, where, we can work on things that help you mourn, which is sort of what you do on the outside to get through or to move through the grief that you're experiencing. Because if we just push it down and push it down and push it down, it's just going to stay stuck there, and it's going to grow and get bigger and just be harmful to us in ways that we may not even realize or recognize as it being that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, coming from what I do, I'm always like, it's going to manifest in some way at some
Yes,
point, and that's going to
exactly.
either be emotionally or physically. It's
Yes,
going to either affect your emotional health, and that might be in relationships or some other aspect, and that could be the relationship you have with yourself or with other people or
right.
going forward, or it's going to affect you somehow physically.
Yes,
You're going to end up being ill in some way.
correct. I agree.
And so that's a huge part of it. And I love the idea of creating that space, because and just this idea of really bringing this to the forefront of people's thinking, and the way we perceive, like the role, I mean the role of being a pet parent or the role of having a pet, because I feel like it is something that does need to be talked about, because I really feel like employers need to change. I think the society needs to change and realize that this is a topic or an aspect of life which we need to incorporate into what we offer people, when we are with people, like
Right.
to be more compassionate and loving. This is
Yeah,
something that is an issue.
absolutely. I mean, I feel like I sense there being a movement shift towards that, which is good, but it's slow. It's
Mhm.
slow. It could stand to speed up a little bit. And, you really have to sometimes go out of your way to seek out what's right for you. And a lot of times when we are in our grief, to have the energy to get on the computer and, start Googling, and what do I even put in the search bar to find what I'm looking for, can be so overwhelming and so daunting that I'm sure there's a lot of people that just decide over and over again not to even look, and it's hard.
Yeah, and I think that that's where some different avenues to me can be opened. I think that it's getting to be, I think, more accepted, but or more present is this feeling of, or this offering from, like, where vets will actually suggest to people and say, you know, and actually have lists or organizations or people that people, you know, their clients can contact if they've lost a pet. And so I feel like in the veterinary world, that's probably a huge part, because that was one of the things that I always felt like that was in previous years, I always felt was kind of missing,
Right.
because you lose a pet, and yes, you know, my vets have always sent cards and, you know, kind of thing, saying how sorry they were for the loss or whatever, but then it kind of ended. And it wasn't
Yeah.
like anybody ever checked up on you again, depending. I mean, with the vets I've had in previous years, I always had multiple pets. So I was going in to see them anyway, possibly,
Right.
but not necessarily, depending on how old that other pet was. And all of a sudden, like, I think in the veterinary world, it could be something that is definitely made more available to clients.
Right. Right. Well, it's funny you say that, because next on my list, as I continue to try to get my name out there, is a whole list of vets that I'm hoping to introduce myself to. And so far, the ones that I have done, I'm getting a really nice response, a receptive response, and just reconfirmation that there is the need for this. So that's reassuring. And so yeah, my own experience, again, I didn't even know this existed when I was going through it. And so it was really more after the fact for me, but I know that I wish I had known before. So any way that I can let people know. And a lot of times when you're in this specific pet loss grief space, as you meet people and talk to people, they don't necessarily need you right now, but just to have the conversation and make the introduction, so down the road, if they need someone or need something and support in this way, that hopefully me or someone like me would come to mind.
That, and the fact that even if people don't have pets, everyone knows someone with a pet. That's what I always
Yes.
say.
Oh
I
my
don't,
goodness,
I was
yes.
like, you know, I look at all the people, I mean, pet people a lot of times hang out with other pet people.
Right.
But if I ask my friends, like, I'm sure my friends who don't have a pet, they know probably, I don't know how many people that have pets.
Yeah.
And, you know, so we all know someone who
Right.
will be in that place at some point.
Right. But again, there's the whole thing of, it's hard for a lot of us to even say we need help or admit that we're not okay. So there's that battle first. So if nothing else, I want people to move more towards feeling comfortable to look for and ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
we all experience that at some point in our lives. We all are in a place at one point or another where we need some sort of help. Why are we so uncomfortable asking for it?
Yeah, I remember at one point, I remember the first time I had been in a car accident, and I did need help. And, you know, I think we grow up thinking we need to be quote unquote very self-sufficient and very independent. And the fact that we might need help makes us, our image is that, well, if I ask for help, I'm perceived as being weak.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
really, I've learned through the years, it's the exact opposite. Asking for
Yeah,
help actually reveals that you have strength.
bingo. I mean, exactly. It's a sign of being brave and being very strong, actually. I could not agree with that more. So I'm glad that you said that.
So, why don't you tell people how they can connect with you, Crystal?
Yeah, so my website is getcrystalclear.com. And so you can find my website there. I'm on Facebook, Crystal Clear Coaching. I'm on Instagram at Get Crystal Clear as well. I am offering a free full session to anyone that's interested through the rest of 2023. So I'm excited to do that. So it's really any no pet parent topic is off limits. So if anyone wanted to reach out to me, and have a session. There's no obligation. There's no pressure for anything above and beyond that or more than that. So that offer is spelled out on my website. And, right now I'm working on forming a free support group that would be something, similar to Zoom. I'm trying to do some things locally as well. For example, September 10th is National Pet Memorial Day. So I'm trying to, I have organized a special bubble release ceremony that's going to be happening here in my town. So just a lot of different things that I'm trying to do. But I feel like, as it says on my website, grief is not simple, but working with me is. So if someone wants to just have one session and then we leave it as, if you need me again in the future, you reach out at that time. I'm not someone who says, oh, you must commit to a package of 10 sessions, or you need to work with me for 6 months in order for there to be anything, useful or productive to come out of this. I feel like I just want to be very flexible, and someone can utilize my services as little or as much as they'd like. So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Crystal. We really appreciate you being here, and I will pop in some information in the comment section or in the description so that you all can reach out to Crystal and just connect with her. And until the next time, thank you so much for joining us here at Pets, People, Life, and Longevity. And I look forward to connecting with you. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Pets, People, Life, and Longevity, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode at exvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcast app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts.